Tim Drake is Brother-Shaped by Graphic Nobody. Chapter 5. Jason walking Tim home proved to be a repeat occurrence. Every day at noon for the rest of the week, Stephanie and Tim would finish their shift with the kids, who now slightly tolerated Tim. Then the trio would leave together, first dropping off Steph at her mom's apartment before continuing to Tim's. Jason refused to give an explanation for his change of behavior, beyond, the alley isn't safe for kids. Never mind that Steph and Tim were both bat-trained vigilantes. Tim tried not to be too annoyed about the babying. A small, childish part of him was even excited to get to know his predecessor in a non-violent setting. Initially, Steph and Jason did most of the talking, but it only took a couple of days for Tim to get used to the older boy's presence. Jason was surprisingly smart and had a wicked sense of humor. He was also proving himself to be a bit of a mother hen. So yeah, that was the time Tim fell asleep on a roller coaster. Stephanie finished her story with a proud grin, ignoring Tim's slightly embarrassed eye roll. Timbo, Timberlina, how the fuck do you fall asleep on a roller coaster? Jason stared at the younger boy, incredulous, as they made their way towards Steph's apartment. Tim shrugged unrepentantly, holding back a grin. It's like falling asleep in a car. The speed is relaxing. Falling asleep anywhere was a superpower, and he refused to be ashamed. Relaxing? Jason looked at Stephanie. Is he serious right now? Stephanie, whose favorite pastime was embarrassing Tim, just cackled. There's plenty where that came from. Tim can fall asleep anywhere. One time, I swear I got him snoring during a stakeout of Two-Face's warehouse. Jason looked like he was aging a decade, as Tim let out a groan. I told you, I wasn't sleeping. I had allergies and they made it sound like I was snoring. My dude. Stephanie gave him an unimpressed look. You were drooling on my shoulder. Was not. Tim faked an affronted look, despite the warmth in his chest. Was too. Was not. Was. Jason pushed in between the pair, cutting them off. Okay. What are you both, 10? Stephanie, in her infinite maturity, leaned around Jason to stick her tongue out at Tim. Tim let out a grumble. She started it. Well, I'm ending it. Jason huffed, looking like he was questioning his life choices. The trio continued in companionable silence for another block. Tim and Steph sending middle fingers and silly faces at one another behind Jason's back. Despite still being in Crime Alley, Tim couldn't help but relax. Tim was plenty familiar with the alley, both from his time as Robin and from his bat-stalking days. Batman rarely entered the neighborhood where his parents were killed, but once Jason became Robin, he always patrolled the area, checking in on the street kids and sex workers from his old home. Tim was determined to get as many photos of Jason's Robin as possible, so he would follow the older boy around on the rooftops, learning to stick to the shadows and avoid shady figures. Still, he had witnessed his fair share of violence in the neighborhood, and knew to stay alert. But something about Jason had him lowering his guard. Despite all the evidence in the contrary, the older boy created an aura of safety that Tim struggled to understand. This was his Robin. Even without his Red Hood gear, Jay Peters had a "don't fuck with me" vibe that caused others on the street to give him a wide berth. If Bruce saw Tim right now, focusing on his friends and paying little attention to the people around him, he would have been assigned a month's worth of extra situational awareness training, paired with a truly mind-numbing PowerPoint on vigilance. Stephanie got a distinctly evil glint in her eye as they rounded the corner. Hey, Jay, maybe I should tell Tim about the time you... Boom! The explosion proved that Tim was a sucker who shouldn't let his guard down and should listen to Bruce. Don't tell Bruce. The trio was thrown to the ground as a nearby storefront exploded in a shower of glass and smoke. Tim lay stunned for a moment, ears ringing, as he tried to regain his bearings. Sound slowly trickled back in as screams filled the street, sirens wailing in the distance. Tim started taking stock of his body, Robin training kicking in. He had definitely hit his head when he went down, but he didn't think he was concussed. All of his limbs felt intact, nothing broken. A heavy weight was pinning him down at the torso. Tim raised his head to see that Jason had thrown himself across both Tim and Stephanie in the explosion. Stephanie was starting to sit up and take stock, similar to Tim. Tim let out a groan, shaking Jason's shoulder. "Let me up." Jason moaned, rolling off Tim and Steph. Tim's eyes widened in shock as he saw half the older boy's face covered in blood. The wound started somewhere in the boy's hair, but it was difficult to tell where, as blood spread over his black locks. "Oh, that doesn't look good." Stephanie shifted into a kneeling position, cradling Jason's head in her lap. Tim began a concussion check. Jason was able to answer the questions easy enough, but still seemed dazed. "We need to get him out of here. Jason, the two of us aren't going to be able to carry you. Think you can stand?" Tim asked. Rather than answer, Jason sat up stiffly, wincing in pain. Stephanie and Tim helped him up onto his feet, allowing him to sling an arm around each of their shoulders. The trio made their way out of the wreckage. Once they had made it a block or so, Tim stopped and pulled out his phone. "I'll call Bruce to come get us. Let him know about the explosion." Jason swiped his phone away faster than a potentially concussed man should have managed. "No." Tim tried to get his phone back, but Jason was unfairly tall and held it out of his reach. "Jason, you might need stitches, so either Bruce or the hospital. Seeing as you're legally dead, I don't think the hospital is a good idea." Jason just shook his head, the action eliciting a wince. Stephanie frowned. "My dude, you look like Carrie after she was crowned prom queen. You need help." "No Bruce, no hospitals. I have a safe house not far from here. I'll stitch myself up there." Tim sent a helpless look Steph's way. She just shrugged in return. Tim let out a heavy sigh. "Fine, but I'm doing the stitches. We don't know how bad your concussion is. What's the address?" Jason gave the two instructions as they turned and made their way back the way they had come. It took around 15 minutes for them to arrive at the nondescript apartment building. By that time, blood had dripped down and soaked Jason's shoulder, as the man's movements became more and more lethargic. This being Gotham, and with smoke still rising in the distance, they didn't get too many weird looks. After awkwardly assisting Jason up 2 flights of stairs, and following his instructions for disabling the security, Tim and Steph were able to dump Jason unceremoniously onto the old, suspiciously stained couch. Besides the couch, the living room had an aged but sturdy-looking coffee table, as well as an entertainment center and television. Bookshelves lined the walls, overflowing with a wide variety of what appeared to be fiction novels. Was that Bridgerton? The living room flowed straight into a small kitchen, with 2 additional doors that probably led to a bedroom and bathroom. For a safe house, it was surprisingly well stocked. "Where's your medkit?" Tim asked, panting slightly. Jason was about 220 pounds of pure muscle, and no amount of Robin training prepared Tim to lug that around for 5 blocks. "Kitchen sink," Jason mumbled, throwing an arm over his eyes to block out the light. Tim quickly retrieved the medkit and set to work cleaning Jason's wound, while Stephanie prepared the sutures. She had the steadier hand of the two of them. Luckily, the wound was much smaller than Tim had been expecting, and only required a few stitches. The trio sat in silence as the wound was tended to. Stephanie sat back after finishing her work, as Tim disposed of the bloody bandages and gauze. "There, all set. Now take these and try to get some rest." She handed Jason 2 Advil and a glass of water. "We'll wake you up to check on you soon." Jason was surprisingly compliant, stretching out on the couch and closing his eyes. Within minutes, his breath had deepened as he fell asleep. Tim watched him carefully, mind flashing back to the moment when Jason had thrown himself over Tim and Steph, blocking them from the fire and debris, and likely preventing further injury. The older boy must have been acting on instinct. Tim took his time washing the blood off his hands. He probably looked like a mess. He could still feel shards of glass scratch his scalp when he touched his hair. Soot and dust covered his clothes and skin. Stephanie didn't look much better, as she came over and hip-checked him out of the way to wash her own hands. About half of her hair had fallen out of its ponytail, standing in an odd angle on the side of her head. Some of Jason's blood had dripped onto her light purple shirt. Once she was done washing her hands, she pulled out Tim's phone, handing it over. I swiped it when I finished his stitches. Thank you. Tim sighed in relief when he saw the brand new phone was undamaged. That would not have been a fun explanation to his father. He sent off a text to his dad, letting him know he was hanging out with Steph and would be home late. His dad sent a thumbs up in response. He followed up with a text to Bruce, letting him know about potential rogue activity downtown. Tim didn't mention his own presence at the explosion. Dad replaced your phone then? Steph asked quietly, keeping her voice low for the sleeping crime lord's sake. Yeah, he gave it to me a few days ago. He apologized? She kept her tone light, but Tim felt himself tense anyway. He gave her a skeptical look. What do you think? Steph huffed. That really sucks, Tim. Tim shrugged. It's whatever. And hey, at least you can send me bad TikToks again. Stephanie gasped in mock offense, allowing Tim to break the tension. My TikToks are hilarious, and you know it. I'm the meme queen. A humor connoisseur, if you will. Only the best for my favorite ex-boyfriend. Tim laughed in response, shoulders relaxing once again, in the way they only ever did around Steph. Of course, my mistake. Stephanie grinned. Well, don't repeat it. Now, you gonna be okay keeping an eye on Metalhead for me? My mom is gonna freak out if I don't get home soon. Tim nodded, looking back over at the sleeping man. I'm about 75% sure he won't shoot me these days. We'll be fine. Steph gave him a hug and a peck on the cheek. Well, I'll see you tomorrow. Make sure you both eat something. Sure thing, Mom. He rolled his eyes. Let me know when you get home. Stephanie looked like she had been run over by a steamroller, gave her usual mocking salute, and exited the apartment. Tim took a moment to rearm the security before hovering awkwardly in the center of the apartment, unsure of what to do now. He scanned the room around him, taking in the details. All of the furniture was clearly secondhand. So were the books. When he was feeling brave, Tim used to ask Dick for some stories about the previous Robin. Tim remembered Dick telling him once about Jason refusing to buy new books. Even once he had access to Bruce's fortune. Something about giving new life to old things. The stories came to a screeching halt once Jason was revealed to be Red Hood. Tim couldn't help but compare Jason's safe house to his own apartment with his dad. The brownstone had been decorated by his mother in sleek, minimalistic style. The only personal touches were the artifacts his parents had brought back from their travels. Tim always felt a bit cold when he was there, although he didn't know why. In contrast, Jason's safe house had a distinct, homey feel to it. Every object was well used and well loved in a way that Tim wasn't used to seeing. Just like when he was with Jason, it was easy for him to relax here. After taking in all these details, Tim plopped down on the floor and started playing with his phone, ready to wait however long it took for Jason to wake up. Jason had been sleeping deeply when he was rudely awoken by a loud beeping noise. He groaned and attempted to cover his ears. Then, his eyes flew open as he recognized the sound of a smoke alarm followed by muffled cursing. Someone was in his apartment, and his apartment was on fire. Jason shot up off the couch, causing his gut to churn uncomfortably. Right, head wound. The source of the noise was found immediately when he saw Tim Drake standing in his small kitchenette, frantically waving a dish towel at the still beeping smoke alarm. Jason stormed over and grabbed a broom, jabbing the button that would turn the alarm off. Of all the safe houses to pick while mildly concussed, why did he pick the one that was actually up to fire code? Jason let out a sigh of relief as the noise stopped. Whirling angrily towards the sheepish 15-year-old, he noticed a smoking pan of something had been thrown into the still-running sink. "What the hell are you doing?" Jason growled out. The replacement winced, backing up a step. "Making soup?" "Soup? How the fuck did you burn soup?" Was the kid an idiot? I'm sorry. I found a can in the pantry. I usually cook it in the microwave, but you didn't have one. Why the hell would you cook soup in a microwave? Jason was appalled by this idiot child. So I don't burn it! The kid was clenching his fist tightly, looking down and to the left instead of meeting Jason's eye. Jason groaned, forcing himself to take a deep breath. Okay, rich kid. Grab your phone and your card. We're ordering groceries. If no one was going to teach this kid how to be a functioning human, Jason would have to step up to the plate. What? Tim pulled his phone out, looking confused. Chop chop. I'll give you a list. I'm teaching you how to make soup. Jason proved to be a surprisingly patient teacher, once Tim managed to see past his annoyance over the burnt soup. After ordering what seemed like a ridiculous amount of ingredients to Tim, Jason had gone into the bathroom to shower and change out of his bloody clothes. Once he had come out, he provided Tim with a folded towel and clothes and sent him to shower. Tim was quick and efficient as he scrubbed the soot and grime off his body. He toweled and changed into the clothes Jason had provided him with. It was a comically large Wonder Woman t-shirt and a pair of basketball shorts. Tim had to fold them over at the waist and pull the drawstrings tight to make them stay up. But there was nothing he could do about the length as they reached his shins. Despite both his parents being fairly tall people, Tim was 5'5" on a good day. Once that was taken care of, he went back out to the kitchen to find Jason putting away the groceries, which must have arrived while Tim was still in the bathroom. Wash and chop the vegetables while I cook the chicken, Jason ordered, pointing to the pile of onions, carrots, and celery. Tim rinsed the vegetables in the sink before grabbing the onion, carefully pulling off the peel in small strips. After a moment of intense concentration, Jason looked over at him and did a double take. What the hell are you doing? Tim looked down at the onion in his hands. Peeling the onion? That's not how you peel an onion. Jesus, kid. Did Alfred never teach you how to cook anything? Tim shook his head, flushing in embarrassment. Jason sighed, rubbing his eyes. Okay, we start with the basics then. What followed was a detailed lesson in how to hold a knife, what knife to use when, how to peel and chop an onion, peel carrots, sauté vegetables, season chicken, and a million other little things Tim didn't realize went into making soup. Why not just get soup pre-made? Tim questioned once the broth was simmering. 1. Cooking is relaxing and an essential skill. 2. Tastes better this way. Your parents never showed you this stuff? Or your nanny or whatever? Tim shook his head. Neither of my parents ever cooked, and I didn't really have nannies growing up. I thought you said your parents traveled for work. Who took care of you? Jason questioned. They did travel. I mean, I think I had a nanny when I was little, but I didn't need one when I got older. My parents sent me to boarding school during the year. What about in the summer? Jason was looking at him in confusion. Miss Mack, our housekeeper, would drop off frozen meals for me twice a week. Tim explained, unsure why Jason was asking him so many questions. What about the rest of the time? What if you got sick or hurt, or the power went out or something? Tim shrugged. I got a phone and a credit card. Plus, the bus stop was only a couple of blocks away. If I couldn't get a hold of my parents, I could take the bus to a free clinic. Anyway, I didn't get sick much as a kid. That's fucked up. You know that's fucked up, right? Jason asked. Tim shrugged, uncomfortable. Why was Jason so worked up? A month ago, the man had hated him. It's just how things were. Nothing bad ever happened. But it could have. God, no wonder Bruce was able to snatch you up and make you Robin. Did your parents even notice? What about your dad? Is he still leaving you alone all the time? God, I wish, Tim muttered. And hey, Bruce didn't make me Robin. I made myself Robin. What the hell is that supposed to mean, kid? Batman picks Robin. Tim shook his head firmly. No, Bruce never wanted another Robin. I made him take me. Jason scoffed. No one makes Bruce do anything, Timbo. Believe me. Well, I did, Tim responded, fist clutching around the ladle he was still holding. He was getting fed up with Jason not believing him. I told him if he didn't make me Robin, I would reveal his secret identity. Then, when he still wouldn't make me Robin, Alfred helped me steal the suit and follow him out on patrol. Jason was looking at him incredulously. Soup long forgotten. Why the hell would you do that? Because, Tim frowned, remembering how things were at that time. Batman needs a Robin. After Batman was out of control. He was putting criminals in the hospital. Not just the rogues, but perch snatchers and porch pirates and people who only turned to crime because they were desperate. Someone needed to rein him in, and I stepped up to the plate. Tim watched Jason close his eyes and pinch his nose, unsure if he was reining in his temper or just staving off a headache from his earlier hit. You're a kid, Timber. It shouldn't be your job to rein him in. Tim shrugged. Well, no one else was going to. I asked Dick at first, tracked him down in Bloodhaven, and asked him to come back. But he said he couldn't. He crossed his arms. Now, I've seen them fight. I know he was right. It wouldn't have worked. Bruce never wanted me, but he did need me, and I did a good job. Tim knew he hadn't been wanted as Robin. He knew Jason didn't approve of him as a successor, and he tried to pretend those facts didn't bother him. But he had proven himself. He outlasted Bruce's stubbornness, even when he was rejected again and again, and forced the man to sleep and bathe and keep himself alive. He even kept a stiff upper lip when Bruce made his disdain and dislike clear in those early days. He survived brutal training with Lady Shiva, pushing himself until he was strong and capable and could hold his own. He proved himself as a leader in Young Justice, and kept the respect of his allies in the Justice League. No one, not even Bruce or Jason, could take that away from him. It had paid off, too. Things got better. Batman started to be seen as a symbol of hope again, rather than just fear. Bruce started taking care of himself with gentle, and sometimes not so gentle, urging from Tim and Alfred. Tim started to see sparks of the Bruce who appeared in Dick's stories. Tim liked to think that he had grown on the man as well, if not as a son, never as a son, then as a partner. Jason sighed, some of his anger seeming to drain away. It's not about how good of a job you did, Timbo. You never should have had to do that job in the first place. None of us, not me or Dick or you, should have been trained like child soldiers to fight in Bruce's crusade. A parent's job is to protect their kids, not the other way around. Well, it's a good thing Bruce isn't my parent, then, Tim responded stubbornly. Jason groaned in frustration. That's not the point. Bruce is an adult. Adults aren't supposed to let kids get hurt. Tim let out a bitter laugh. That's rich coming from you. Or did you forget the time you hunted me down across the country to beat me up? Jason looked stricken and surprisingly hurt. Tim refused to feel bad. I shouldn't have done that, he said softly, catching Tim off guard. He watched the older boy lean against the counter, shoulders slumping. I'm sorry, Tim. Tim felt like he was blue-screening. What? I'm sorry. I never should have gone after you. I took my anger at Bruce and the Joker out on you, and it was wrong of me. Jason turned to face him fully, shoulders pulling back as he met Tim's eye. You didn't deserve that. Tim had no idea how to respond. Jason was only a few years older than him, but he was still an adult, and adults didn't apologize to Tim. I forgive you? He didn't mean for it to come out as a question, but it did. Jason shook his head, sighing again. No, Tim, you don't have to forgive me. In fact, please don't forgive people who beat you up. Tim squared his shoulders stubbornly. Jason didn't get to tell him what to do. It's up to me, not you. If I say I forgive you, then I forgive you. Tim was surprised to find he meant it. He had always known Jason's actions weren't personal. Don't get him wrong. Being rejected and attacked by his former hero had hurt, but it had been more irritating than anything. He walked away with fairly mild injuries, all things considered, especially knowing what the Red Hood was capable of. Jason stared at him for a long moment. I'm not gonna talk you out of this, am I? Nope, Tim responded, popping the pea. Jason looked down at the floor and rubbed his face, muttering something that sounded like, "No preservation skills," before looking back up at Tim. Alright then, soup isn't going to finish itself. Pass me the noodles. Chapter 6. Cooking lessons with Tim continued, along with walking the kids home. By the end of the week, Jason had taught Tim how to make soup, roasted chicken, and lasagna. The plan this afternoon was to start on baking basics. Jason wasn't afraid to admit that the little shit had grown on him over the past couple of weeks. Despite his choices regarding nighttime activities, the kid was scary smart. Tim had solved a case that had stumped Jason for weeks the other night, as they waited for the lasagna to cool. When Jason had praised him for it, Tim had gone red as a tomato, mumbling about how it wasn't a big deal. It was oddly endearing. Jason made an effort to heap on the praise whenever possible. Clearly, it wasn't happening at home, and Bruce was helpless with words of affirmation. Jason had foregone showing up at the shelter this morning, choosing instead to sleep in. He had been out all night dealing with some of his men, who had been caught selling to kids and needed to be reminded of the rules, and felt he had earned a lie-in. Jason was no longer worried about trusting Steph and Tim around the younger kids, and they had both promised to avoid any more shortcuts on their way home, so he wasn't concerned with taking the day off. Jason had just gone to his favorite grocery store to pick up everything he needed for his lesson with Tim. He climbed the stairs to his apartment, whistling a tune, when he saw his front door. The security was disarmed. Knowing that it was probably Tim, but unwilling to take any chances, Jason sat down his groceries silently, pulling out his handgun and flicking off the safety. Jason crept into the apartment on light feet, thanking his past self for greasing the hinges on the door. He sighed and lowered his weapon when he saw a familiar mop of black curly hair. "What the hell are you doing in my apartment, Dickface?" Jason and Dick had only interacted as Red Hood and Nightwing since Jason's resurrection. While Jason had stopped attacking on sight, he still wasn't ready for a family reunion. "Aww," Dick Grayson grinned, lounging across Jason's sofa like an oversized cat. "Is that any way to greet your big brother, Little Wing?" Jason kept his face impassive. "How did you find this place?" This was his favorite safe house. He really didn't want to have to burn it. "Did you think I wasn't going to notice my little brothers hanging out without me? Come on, Jay. You know me better than that." Jason finally switched the safety back on, before returning his gun to its holster. He grabbed his groceries from the hallway, bringing them to the kitchen as Dick followed. "Maybe we didn't invite you for a reason." Dick gasped dramatically, holding a hand to his chest. "Would have hurt less if you had shot me." "I still could," Jason huffed, putting the groceries away. "Seriously, Dick, why are you here?" Dick dropped the act, letting out a sigh. "Is it so hard to believe I wanted to see you, Jay?" Jason huffed. "Yeah, right. Did Bruce send you? Because you can tell him to fuck right off." "No one sent me, Jay. I was trying to check on Timmy, and found this place. Once I saw a chance to speak with you, I had to take it." "Speak then," Jason snapped, wanting to get the lecture over with. He should have never stopped shooting bats on sight. "I wanted to say I'm sorry." "Huh?" Jason whirled around to face his brother, Dick. "I'm sorry, Little Wing." To Jason's horror, Dick was tearing up. "I told you to call me if you needed me, but when you called, I wasn't there." What the fuck? What the fuck? This was not the lecture on morality Jason expected. I should have been around more. I shouldn't have let my anger at Bruce impact how I treated you. I was so mad when he gave you Robin. I felt like he was replacing me. But that was never your fault. I'm sorry I wasn't a better brother." "Dick, stop." This was quickly devolving into very uncomfortable territory. Jason didn't want to hear this. "No, Jason, I need to say this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me, and I'm so happy you're back. Big blue eyes stared at him earnestly, brimming with tears. Jason felt something crack in his chest. Had anyone said that to him? Since the moment he woke up in the fucking coffin, gasping and clawing at dirt, he had been filled with rage. Rage at the Joker, that rage at Bruce, but mostly rage at whatever fucked up force had brought him back. Brought him back wrong. His second life had been one big, long battle, as he proved over and over that he should have stayed dead. Jason tried to reply, but nothing came out. How dare Dick make him feel emotions? He had a reputation. He swallowed past the lump in his throat and tried again. I'm not back, Dickie. Not really. I died. I didn't come back the same. Dick needed to know Jason wasn't the bright-eyed Robin he had once been. He wasn't magic anymore. I don't care. What? How could Dick say that? How could he not care? I don't care if you're not the same. I'm not the same either. Dick looked down, rubbing the back of his neck. You're still my brother, Little Wing. Jason opened his mouth, and, to his horror, let out a choked sob, the sound raw and ugly in his throat. Sniffing out emotional vulnerability, like a bloodhound, Dick reached out and wrapped Jason in a hug. Jason noted distantly that he was taller than his big brother now. He tried to find the strength to pull away, but for once, his rage was nowhere to be found. In its place was a soul-crushing loneliness and despair that had been chasing him since the warehouse in Ethiopia. Jason wrapped his arms around Dick, hugging back tightly as he allowed himself to fall apart. Tim entered the apartment 20 minutes later, to the sight of two teary-eyed men who were desperately trying to regain their Bruce Wayne, TM, emotional repression. Tim stared at them for a long moment, before shrugging and shutting the door behind himself. Pancake time? Tim had a blast baking with the two former Robins that afternoon. After whatever initial awkwardness was hanging over the air, when he arrived dissipated, the three boys fell into rhythm. Jason called out instructions as Tim did his best to listen. Dick made a game of calling out random, made-up instructions at the same time as Jason, while trying to swipe the different fruit and various toppings Jason had purchased. Within 10 minutes, Jason and Tim had kicked him out of the kitchen. Tim was absolutely giddy to see the two men getting along. He wasn't sure what had changed, but if Jason and Dick were acting like family again, it would only be a matter of time before Jason was willing to come home. Since day one, Tim's mission had been to find what was broken in the Wayne Manor and repair it. He had quickly learned that nothing would fill the hole that Jason left behind. But now, Jason was back. If Tim could convince him to come home, to reconcile with Bruce, his job would be complete. Tim tried not to think too hard about what that would mean for his place as Robin, and within the Wayne family. This was about helping Bruce, not giving in to his own selfish desires. If nothing else, he would always have a place within Young Justice, even if Batman stopped needing Robin. "Alright, Timbo, want to try flipping a pancake?" Jason asked, pulling Tim out of his head. "Oh, I want to try," Dick called excitedly. "Absolutely not," Jason responded. "The one time I saw you make pancakes, you got batter on the ceiling. The ceilings in the manor are high as fuck, Dickwing. I didn't know whether to be impressed or disgusted." Dick pouted as Jason walked Tim through the steps. When Tim managed it on the first try, both Jason and Dick cheered, causing the younger boy to blush. Soon, the trio were seated at the coffee table, tucking into the pancakes. Tim covered his in strawberries and whipped cream, while Jason went with classic butter and syrup. Dick had managed to add every available topping to his, while still drowning them in maple syrup. "Oh my god, these are delicious," Tim groaned around a mouthful, ignoring the ghost of Janet Drake bemoaning his poor etiquette. "They're pretty damn good if I do say so myself," Jason agreed. "Little Wing, baby bird, these pancakes are to die for." Dick was already halfway through his plate, whipped cream on his nose. Tim was laughing at the older man's antics when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowning, when he saw it was his dad. He held up a finger, indicating for Jason and Dick to be quiet as he answered. He raised the phone to his ear. Hello? Timothy, where are you? Tim held in a wince at the slight slur of his dad's voice, standing and walking into the kitchen for a semblance of privacy. I'm with Steph. You were supposed to be home 20 minutes ago for family dinner. Donna and I are waiting for you. Tim huffed. Since when is family dinner a thing? He tried to ignore Jason and Dick's shameless eavesdropping. I told you about these plans last week. Dad, you didn't tell me we had plans. I'll head home now, okay? I can be there in 15 minutes. He would have to rush a bit, but it was doable. He heard Donna in the background, calling out a cheerful hello. Jack grumbled, telling him to hurry home, and hanging up before Tim could reply. Tim pocketed his phone, turning to face Dick and Jason. Sorry, guys, I have to go. I forgot about plans with my dad. Dick frowned. He always looked a bit grumpy when Jack was mentioned. Tim tried not to get irritated by it. It's no problem, baby bird. Need a ride? Tim weighed the pros and cons for a moment. If its dad saw Dick's car, he would have questions. But the sooner he got home, the less angry his dad would be. Hopefully. That would be great, Dick. Thanks. I'll come too, Jason stated, surprising Tim. The trio headed downstairs and piled into Dick's old Toyota. Tim sitting behind Dick so Jason could scooch his seat all the way back. Tim hoped he would be that tall someday, but it wasn't looking likely. So, family dinner, huh, Tim Tam? Jason asked casually. Tim nodded, fiddling with his phone. Yeah, I forgot we had plans. His dad had probably told him last week. Tim misremembered their conversations all the time. If you're late, is your old man gonna break your phone again? Jason asked casually, meeting his eye in the rearview mirror. Break your phone? Again? Dick asked in alarm, looking over at Jason. Wow. Fuck you, Jason Todd. Tim felt his cheeks warm in embarrassment. Shut up, Jason. It wasn't a big deal. What wasn't a big deal? Dick kept trying to glance back at Tim, but had to keep his eyes on the road. My dad and I were arguing and he broke my phone. It wasn't on purpose. Jason turned fully in his seat, giving Tim an unimpressed look. You said he put it in the garbage disposal. Shut up! Tim hissed again, giving an unrepentant Jason a harsh glare. If he had known Jason was a snitch, he would never have mentioned it. You misunderstood. Timmy, what were you and your dad fighting about? What happened? Oh, great. Now Dick sounded all concerned. This is why Tim didn't tell him things. It sounds bad out of context. I was out past curfew and not answering my phone, so my dad took it. It really wasn't a big deal. They were turning onto Tim's street. Dick pulled into a parking spot. It doesn't sound great. Tim, I thought you said you and your dad were getting along better. Dick turned in his seat to face Tim more fully. We are. Tim unbuckled. But we won't be if I keep him waiting any longer. Thanks for the ride, Dick. Tim grabbed his stuff and climbed out of the car, ignoring Dick's calls for him to wait. He shot the two boys a wave and headed towards his building. After a long moment, he heard Dick's car start up and pull away. Jason, what the hell were you talking about? Dick asked as soon as it became clear Tim wasn't going to come back and answer his questions. Timbo's asshole dad put his phone in the garbage disposal after a fight. I overheard him telling Stephanie about it. She told me not to press him, but it isn't sitting right with me, Dick. Jason didn't feel bad about sharing the story. Tim needed more people to look out for him. Dick frowned, starting his car back up and pulling out onto the street. Has he told you anything else? Jason shook his head. I've heard him mention arguments to Steph a few times, but nothing like that. Have you met the guy? A few times at galas and stuff, and when I helped Tim move back in with him. He was still in a wheelchair at that point, and couldn't help with moving. He was polite enough, but I know he wasn't thrilled about Tim living with us during his coma. Dick was frowning as he recalled the story. What, he wanted the kid to go into foster care or something? What has B said? Despite what Tim implied, and his own issues with Bruce, he knew his former father cared about the kid. He's keeping an eye on it. Jason rolled his eyes, pulling a sigh from Dick. He is, Jason, but there isn't a lot we can do when Tim never talks about his parents. We've been working with hunches and suspicion here. Until Tim comes to us, our hands are tied. That's bullshit and you know it. Bruce Wayne was the most powerful man in Gotham, if not the whole country. If he wanted to make something happen, he would. A broken phone and some potential neglect that is no longer happening isn't enough proof, Jay. Dick sighed. I don't like it any more than you do. All we can do is keep showing up to support Tim and hope he tells us if anything more is wrong. Dick parked his car outside of Jason's apartment. Tim and I are patrolling together this weekend. I'll try and get more information, okay? I'm glad you told me about this. Yeah, well, Jason unbuckled. Someone has to look out for the kid. He clearly doesn't look out for himself. Dick's eyes softened, a smile pulling at his lips. He's really grown on you, huh? Yeah, Jason agreed. Like mold. He smirked as his comment pulled a surprised laugh from his brother. Jason climbed out of the car. I'll see you later, Dickface. Wait! Jason turned back. Dick had an uncharacteristically nervous look on his face. You'll let me know if you, have to leave town or anything, right? Jason rolled his eyes, ignoring the warmth spreading in his chest at Dick's concern. I'm not going anywhere, Dick. Now get lost. Dick grinned at the reassurance. Bye, Jay. The older boy threw him a wave and drove away. Bonus chapter. Dick Grayson wasn't sure what to make of Jack Drake. When Tim had first shown up at the door of Dick's apartment, asking him to return as Robin, Dick's first thought had been, where the hell are this kid's parents? It was a question he found himself asking many times over the coming months. His first impression of Tim had been that the boy was too small. He would have guessed that he was around 10 or 11, not 13. Despite his small stature, Tim showed a remarkable amount of maturity and independence for his age. Sure, he could be naive at times, and had a general insensitivity that was typical of children his age, but this was overshadowed by his clear desire to do good and help others. Once Tim stepped into the role of Robin, Dick was determined to get things right this time. He had failed with Jason, too caught up in his own hurt feelings and bitterness towards Bruce to properly bond with his adoptive brother, until it was too late. So Dick made an effort, making the trips back to Gotham at least twice a month for shared patrols and training sessions. God knew the boy would need interactions with the hero community outside of Batman. As Bruce overcame the worst of his grief and began stepping back into the role of father and mentor, these visits extended into family dinners and movie nights. Dick quickly learned that Tim was extremely reluctant to spend time in the manor outside of vigilante work. Tim was much faster to accept invitations back to Dick's apartment, so brotherly bonding sessions began to take place in Bloodhaven. When he asked Tim where his parents thought he was during patrols or hangouts, Tim always gave a vague answer about knowing how to avoid his parents' notice. Dick thought it extremely strange that they hadn't noticed Tim leaving the house late at night or spending entire weekends in another city with a man 10 years older than him. Asking about it too much caused Tim to clam up or to lash out in equal parts, so Dick learned to leave it well enough alone. When Dick learned about the accident and that Tim would be moving into the manor as Bruce's foster son, he couldn't help but feel selfishly excited. Tim had seemed to thrive during his time in the manor. Like any good Robin, Tim had never had a problem disagreeing with Batman in the field, but he had always been extremely polite and reserved out of costume. Once he was under Bruce's care, Tim had started to really come out of his shell. He was less hesitant about sharing his opinions and preferences. He stopped questioning his place at what he deemed to be family events. It was good for Bruce as well. Dick's father figure had stopped drinking and was actually sleeping a normal amount again, even if it wasn't during normal hours. Dick had joked in the past that Bruce was secretly a PTO mom at heart. and this was proven when the man went out of his way to ask Tim about school and hobbies, while gently encouraging him to eat and sleep more. Dick was with Tim when the boy received the call that his father was awake. The two had been watching a movie in the Manor's media room when Tim's phone lit up, Gotham General showing across the screen. Dick had paused the movie and watched in silent concern as Tim accepted the call, rapidly paling in response to whatever was said on the other line. Tim had reached out and gripped the sleeve of Dick's sweater tightly, asking clarifying questions that didn't make sense out of context. Dick remembered his concern growing at the action. While Tim was getting better at accepting physical affection, he rarely initiated it. After several long minutes, Tim thanked the other person and hung up, setting his phone in his lap. "My father's awake," Tim said, staring wide-eyed at the device. That was not what Dick was expecting to hear. From what he understood, Jack Drake's prognosis had not been good. In fact, Dick had half expected Tim to tell him that the man had finally passed away. Dick hurried to shove his own feelings aside, to be examined at a later date. Or better yet, ignored entirely. That's great, Tim!" The words seemed to snap Tim out of his shock. The younger boy released Dick's arm and jumped up, the movie long forgotten. It is! Of course it is!" A slightly strained smile stretched across Tim's face. "This is a miracle. I need to talk to Bruce and my caseworker. They said he'd be ready to come home in a month. I need to get the apartment ready." Tim paced as he talked, a slightly manic edge to his movements. Dick felt helpless as he watched Tim slip into planning mode. He couldn't help but think about the adoption papers he knew lay upstairs in Bruce's desk, no longer needed. Once Bruce was informed, he and Alfred insisted on handling all the preparations for Tim, encouraging him to spend his time visiting his father, and letting them get used to one another again. Alfred even managed to work his magic and convince Tim Drake to purchase Drake Manor, making Tim their immediate neighbor, rather than sending him back to the city. Bruce used his connections to make the place wheelchair accessible, and ready to move in by the time Jack was discharged. Now the day had finally come, and Dick was helping carry boxes into Tim's new home. Unlike Alfred and Bruce, Dick hadn't accompanied Tim to the hospital to visit Jack at any point, so today was his first impression outside of past interactions at social events. The frail man sitting in the wheelchair in front of him bore only a passing resemblance to the man who featured in pictures on Tim's dresser back in the manor. The stress of his coma, paired with the death of his wife, had aged him prematurely. Dick looked for signs of Tim in the man. He was clearly the source of Tim's dark hair, his blue eyes. Their mouths were the same shape, but while Tim's eyes were always sparkling, brimming with curiosity or excitement, Jack's were cold and flat in a way that made Dick shiver. Dick brushed off the feeling as he set down the boxes he was carrying and made his way over. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Drake." He gave his signature Grayson smile, which had charmed the paparazzi for years. "I'm Dick Grayson, Tim's foster brother." Dick reached out and shook Jack's hand. Jack grunted, not returning the smile, but giving a surprisingly firm handshake of his own. Tim hovered nearby, watching the interaction closely. "I hope Timothy didn't cause any trouble for you." Bruce chose that moment to walk in, carrying 2 boxes of his own. "Of course not." Brucey persona was firmly in place. "You've got a great kid here, Jack." Bruce set his boxes down and clapped Tim on the shoulder, causing Dick's brother to duck his head and blush. "Yes, well," Jack nodded. "My physical therapist, Donna, should be here soon. We would hate to keep you. Say goodbye to the Waynes, Timothy." Dick shared a look with Bruce at the clear dismissal. "Bye, Bruce. Thank you for everything." Tim leaned in as Bruce gave him a side hug. Jack watched the interaction with a frown. Dick made his way over, pulling his little brother into a hug of his own. "Let us know if you need anything, Timmy," Dick whispered, squeezing him extra tight. "B is right next door, and I can be here in 40 minutes if you call." Tim hugged him back tightly, pressing his face into Dick's shoulder for a moment as he nodded. "Let's not keep them, Timothy. I'm sure the Waynes have better things to do with their time." Jack said with a slight edge in his tone. Tim pulled back immediately, as Dick frowned at the man. Right, sorry. Tim returned to his father's side. I'll see you later, Dick. With a final wave, Dick and Bruce made their way back out to Bruce's car. They may technically be neighbors, but it was still a 5-minute drive from Wayne Manor to the newly dubbed Drake Manor. I don't like him, Dick stated as soon as their doors were shut. Bruce sighed. Dick, you hardly know the man. I'm sure he's stressed out and wants to spend time alone with Tim. Never seemed to do that in the past, he grumbled. Look, chum, I know you liked having Tim around. I did too, but we can't let our feelings get in the way of Tim bonding with his father. He'll still come over for patrols. Try not to be too jealous. Dick felt irritation bubble up in his throat. Leave it to Bruce to get the totally wrong impression. I'm not jealous, Bruce. I'm concerned. Jack never bothered with Tim before. But he is now, Bruce countered. Obviously, circumstances aren't ideal, but this is a really good opportunity for Tim. We have to trust if something goes wrong, he'll tell us. Dick sighed. Maybe you're right. But could they really trust Tim to come to them? 3 months later, Tim had moved back to the city and stopped his visits to Bluehaven altogether. 6 months later, as Dick took in his little brother's dislocated shoulder and heartbroken expression, he regretted not trusting his gut. Whoa. Jason, I'm sorry. Tim, did you know apologies went that direction? Did you know you can drive backwards on the freeway? It's crazy town out here. I fucking hate myself, okay. My man's over here weighing like 100 pounds more than me, and that's so fucking hot. Okay. I'm not well. This just became an extended discussion about my fucking stuffed animals. I like them. I like them a lot. I found a can of the pastry. Pastry? Tim mumbled. Mumbled? Whoa, Tim, you can't say that shit. Were the noodles in the fridge? I still get comments about why the noodles were in the fridge. Jason needs a gun in a Walmart. Baby girl, that is the right of Robins, okay? You get really angry at Batman, and you bully the new Robin over them becoming Robin after you. Blue eyes, like just straight blue eyes, are the most boring eye color. Which is the correct way to eat pancakes. If you're putting more shit on your pancakes than syrup and butter, you're eating dessert for breakfast at that point. Because he's a freak. Not the good kind of freak. Who the fuck does that? I hope not. Dinah is too good for this man. As Bruce